Hey, everybody. Welcome to our Makers Rhythm, weekly rhythm. It's our Thursday Thoughts. And today we have a dear friend, Mingo Palacios, here. Mingo, it's so good to have you here, man. Thanks for making the time for this. For those of you that don't know Mingo, we're going to hear from him in a moment, but I just want to kind of uh, at least give my perspective on who Mingo is. Mingo is a ministry pioneer in San Diego and beyond. And Mingo, you've been in the trenches for a very long time in this city, man. Faithful, committed, in so many different expressions and in different ways. And you're a collaborative leader. You care so deeply about the success of others. And amongst our friend group, we throw around this kind of quote all the time that a rising tide lifts all ships. And I would say, man, that you embody that so deeply, that your win is other wins and vice versa. And so, man, I'm just so grateful that you'd be here with us today. And let's just start, man. Let's hear from you. Who's Mingo? Who's your family? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks for the invitation. First and foremost, love Makers Church, and I love the heartbeat of how you serve your guys' city so well. I've watched as a fan from afar, and every time we get to cross collaborate, I always see it as a win. I just turned 38 years old. I've been a pastor since I would argue, in high school, helping lead, elementary school and junior high kids. Just always understood that, the burden of leadership sits on the people willing to serve. And the Lord has just always kept me in that posture. So I was a young adult pastor for about a decade, and helped build some really great, I think, ways to serve that generation. Then later, the Lord kind of gave an idea over to me in a season when I was seeing lots of movement in downtown. You're familiar with Moniker Group, Moniker Coffee. I'm one of the co-founders in that great collaboration. And while building Moniker, we just saw a perfect niche to serve people who were far from the church or far from God. And we called it microsites. They were basically pop-up churches where anybody was willing to meet a group of people in need and serve hope and help in equal measure. I wanted to support that effort. And we ran that ministry. I pastored it for 4 years before passing it off. It still exists today. And then after making that pass, I went to go work for Saddleback Rick Warren as the pastor of evangelism for Purpose Driven, which was such a brain melting experience, like getting a front row seat to some of the best leadership capital I think our generation will ever have. And then later getting a call to senior pastor a local church back in the town I love so much. I grew up in San Diego, and now that's what we've been doing for going on 3 years. I got 2 boys, married for 13 years, just absolutely love people and love giving people the courage to take on what dreams God has for them.
Come on, man. I love that. Yeah, that was a huge win for us in San Diego, man, when you came back from the other side of the orange curtain. And it was so fun watching what you were doing with with Purpose Driven Church, and just kind of the innovative things you did with that. I remember the motorhome you remodeled and just went around the nation and encouraged pastors and ministers, and just so many different cool ways that you have just really, I would say, like, your middle name is just, you're a champion. You're a champion for leaders. You're a champion for the local church. And so to get you back in San Diego is huge, man. Tell us a little bit about Torrey Pines Church and the network that you're a part of.
That's great. So Torrey Pines Church is a 60-year-old, I would say, legacy church in San Diego. They've got one of the larger church properties, I think, in the proper city of San Diego. It's strange. It's called Torrey Pines Church because 60 years ago, Torrey Pines was an area. There weren't very many developed municipal kind of communities. And so it actually sits kind of right on the crest, if you're familiar with San Diego, as you go into La Jolla, as the 52 kind of dumps you over that ridge. Torrey Pines Church sits on the top. It divides UTC and really like the beach cities. they've got a long legacy of loving this community and the University City community really well. But about 5 or 6 years ago, they just fell where I think any organization can fall, where lack of leadership kind of becomes the narrative. Lack of vision shortly there follows, and then the church is looking to either pivot and do something with this, the property that they've spent 50 years developing, or they're going to look to partner with another church that has the wind in their sails and something big is happening. And that's where Eastlake Church, which is actually a 9-church network out of the Eastlake community, became the perfect pairing for them. So
Awesome.
Eastlake basically adopted Torrey Pines Church, and 3 years into that adoption, that's when I got the phone call to do something that I had never done before, which was senior lead a church. I was looking at your lead and a couple of other guys going, man, I hope this isn't like the worst mistake of my life. And so for 3 years, I've been the guy versus being a guy inside of a ministry. And man, it's come with really great and sweet victories, and it's come with some really challenging seasons. You're not void one of the other when you're doing this job.
Right, absolutely. Man, thanks for the kind of the history on that. I think what you're part of, you said you're part of a network of 9 different churches, and I think there's some unique stuff about the way you guys are partnered and structured, and because you have kind of some oversight, but you still have the autonomy of being a senior pastor of a local church.
Yeah.
Tell us just a little bit about that, and specifically that will parlay into what I really want to talk about the rest of our time, which is regathering. What does reopening our churches look like? You know, we found out this week that, you know, on the other side of President Trump saying that churches are essential, Governor Newsom came up with some kind of phased rollout plans of what churches would look like. And so there's a lot of big questions. There's a lot of different opinions on what should and should not happen and what those timelines should be. So as senior leaders, talking about the difficulty and the weight that's on our shoulders is navigating those waters. And the thing that I love about San Diego is that there are networks like the one that you're a part of that are official, and then there's really unofficial, just friendship, right?
Bonds and connections with teams and leaders and pastors all over the place.
And so I've just been on the phone constantly with guys like you and other leaders that going, hey, what are we doing? And the reality is like, we don't know. So I just want to get that out there. Like, we don't know, but we're trying our best. So just tell us a little bit about the way the network's structured, and maybe even how that's influencing the way that you're making decisions here when it comes
that's great. So the network structure, you explained it really well. So it's autonomous in the sense that, you know, it's got a localized leadership, pastoral oversight. But what we do collaborate on oftentimes is our content. It's just easier of a burden to bear when you're willing to share notes with other guys and you're all kind of pouring into the same like sermon series. We also utilize some of the same like human resources, assets. We each have unique budgets, but then we've got a global budget also. If you think of like a franchise model is almost the right way to say it. If you were in the marketplace, right? Like I would be a franchisee over this community, which means that there are some expectations and some standards that I hold to, but we can make localized decisions for our community to support our community as we deem necessary and beneficial.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, you know, this would be a great test of that structure, right? This season that we're in as we're navigating this. And I think, you know, one of the beautiful things about organized and like legitimate connections and just relational organic ones are that we don't have to make decisions on our own, that we can be inspired by what each other's doing. We can share notes, we can take cues from each other, but then we can also say like, man, that's great for you, but not for us. And so I'm just really curious, like, where your head's at, you know, on the other side of this news from Governor Newsom. Like, what are you thinking? What does regathering look like for you? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so I should split so that you understand kind of the church that we're looking at. I am a highly technical. I'm very comfortable in the digital spaces. I don't mind a decentralized ministry model, right? Where I don't have to see everybody in order to feel like we are or aren't a healthy position. I love, I run a podcast and I love that because you just know you're putting out what it is that you've been trusted with, and whoever finds it, whenever they find it, so be it. That's God's will.
Right.
In a traditional ministry model, which Torrey Pines Church has been for 60 years, they'd never had an online expression other than, a really poorly placed camera in the back. Good luck if you can find the link. Nobody's going to promote it or hopefully see it, but it's just there for insurance.
Right.
And we made a major pivot to basically pull Torrey Pines Church into the 21st century and facilitate all of our programmatic offerings now through a digital format. So on the regathering plan, we built a 3-phase kind of tier based on some older ministry expressions we've had in seasons past. So right now, everybody's gathering currently in what we would call like home church model, right? You're doing church at home. So let's call it what it is. And eventually, the same way that we kind of got into this, shelter in place call, I think that we're going to come out of it in a phased rollout, right? First, it's going to be, you can hang out with 8 friends, then it's going to be something like 12, then it'll bump to 20, and then you'll have groups of 100. I think currently, Newsom said you can occupy whatever facility you have up to 25% occupancy or up to 100 people, whichever one is less.
Yeah.
That's very strict, very like, you got to do really good at math if you're going to like pull that together. And I just don't think that policy, even though it's great for keeping people physically healthy, I don't think that communicates the heartbeat of the church at large. The capital C church is not an RSVP body.
Right.
The capital C church is a come who you are, when you are, as you are, and a very real Jesus will meet you right where you're at.
Yeah.
So because of that, we're building a phase in between home church, which is where everybody's at right now, and come back to our building church, and we're calling those neighborhood churches. And the idea is that those would be gatherings of roughly a dozen or so people that you feel comfortable with. It doesn't necessarily mean have to be your best friends, but they're people that you'd be willing to invite either into your backyard or your front yard. If you want to have them in your home, so be it. If you want to go to a park. But these would be kind of the stepping stones into regathering, because we haven't stopped ministry. Right. I would argue we've been probably the most missional in the last 2 going on 3 months than maybe this church has done in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, come on. That's awesome, man. I love to see that kind of that wedge in between, that next step. And I'm really excited to see how that kind of plays itself out. And we're thinking along the same lines. What does it, you're never going to go from nothing to everything, right? So what does phasing look like for us? Those are the questions we're asking on our team. I have a question I'm going to get to in a moment. And the question is, how do you stay as or more equal to or more than missional than you are now? You said, you've been more missional, more being the church in the last few months than you have in the last few years, which is epic. How do you not lose that momentum when you start to regather again and some sense of normalcy comes back and we potentially have the risk of getting back into some old patterns? But before we answer that question, I want to read this because I can't even remember where I read this. I think I read it this morning. It says, to just kind of paint a picture of like what regathering would and could look like. It says, if we started now, if we were like, woohoo, churches are essential per the president, and Gavin said we can get 25% or 100 people. So here's like this thing I read. So first you need to go make a reservation on our website. When you arrive on our campus, you need to be escorted to your seat. When you get to when we need to get your contact information to track you down in case someone here is here with the virus, and you'll need to wear a mask. and you have to sit 6 feet apart from everyone in this big room, which is only 20% full, and your kids will have to sit with you, though there's an entire service designed for adults only, because we can't open our kids' environment. And when the service is over, please leave promptly and return to your cars while avoiding contact with any other people.
I
Right?
can't wait to go.
Like that sounds miserable, right? And so I love the picture that paints, because that is an awful experience.
Yeah.
And it competes with what you just said. There's mission, there's ministry happening now, 10x times what was happening while we were gathering. So
Very
why would
much
we
so.
compete with that? So the question back to you is like, how do you carry the momentum of ministry that's happening now when you start to go get that sense of normalcy on the other side of this?
I think that every leader, I think that the culture takes its course on the back of every leader. So if I'm not positioning myself to be missional in a moment where there is great need, then I can't expect the people who I ask to follow me, or the people that I'm uniquely in community with, to do the same, right? And I think that you have a unique calling. It's scriptural that there are people who have a calling for leadership in their lives. The question is, how are you leveraging your leadership when there is a communal need?
Yeah.
And there is a cultural, I think, wall that we've had to bump up against for several years, which is, Sunday is king. The format is very hard to mess with. And as missional as you want to be, you can't disrupt this, because you'll unravel the whole thing altogether.
Speaking of disruption, my son Blake is on the other side dancing around like a madman. I'm doing an interview with my buddy. Can you please go outside? You don't need him. Love you. Use the door code. You know how to do that. Sorry. Perfect segue for disruption. Say that again.
Yes.
Say it again.
Well, I think for people who, I grew up in a church. I grew up going to church. I grew up with age-specific programming, and it served me well. But as we all know, like right now, let's measure the last 3 weeks. We know people who have had financial disruption. We know people who have had major marital disruption. Like we're in that boat, just tensions being a lot higher than they are, because our norm is all thrown off. So if I've tried to solve any of those tensions with a 1-hour church service that has 4 songs and a 30-minute message, I'd be really naive to think that I was meeting somebody in a real way,
right,
with a real solution. Now, that's not to say God wouldn't work through that, but are we paying close enough attention to the actual needs around us, so that we can take all that we've learned by those programs and all those methods, and can we now start to apply them?
Yeah, that's so good, man. That's so good. And I love what you're saying is all those thoughts and concerns and factors, they've been there, but like before COVID, but COVID threw a magnifying glass on those things. And so now as leaders, we're realizing that there's something that we need to pay a lot more attention to than maybe we were, right? Because we can get into the rhythm of making Sunday a Sunday, and Sunday should be great. Sunday should be awesome. We put, I don't think people will ever know the amount of time and energy that we put into preaching, and that our teams put into making Sunday awesome. And so I don't want to undermine the value of Sunday, but stacked on top of that is this pastoral responsibility that we have to go meet people where they're at, to serve people really well in all of those different needs that people have. And so I love that idea. And that's not just our responsibility, but as the church, and this is what we've seen the most in this season, as the church, we can go meet those needs for each other. And I think that's the real beautiful thing that we've seen to begin to blossom in this season. And so I'm committed to that as a leader, to make sure that we can carry this momentum to where we can deploy everybody in the church to go meet each other's needs. and not feel like it's some program or service that we have to provide as a church. The
Yeah.
program or service that we provide is connecting those dots for each other, you know?
I think that you have to measure, you look at the need, and then you look at your tools that you have available to you. And, the service as we once had 10 weeks ago or 11 weeks ago, that was a tool for a certain period of time, a certain season of cultural relevance. And right now that tool doesn't seem to be doing what I would need it to do in this moment.
Right.
And so we're refashioning, we're rethinking what tools are appropriate for this season of ministry. And I think, I think of our membership rhythms. We understand Scripture tells us it's by our love for one another that people will know that we are Jesus people. So let's start there. Those are probably the easiest bucket. You can take care of the people that you love, that you know. And then that's evidential of the kind of community that you have. It's like the stamp or the proof of the pudding. And so if you can't take care of those that well, if you're always bickering about, when should we open and when shouldn't we open, or what are you going to do to serve me because my priority is more better than your priority? What that tells the people on the outside that have real needs looking inside is, I don't want to get caught up in that drama.
Dude.
And so I've been trying really deeply to remind our community, if we can be outward focused in this moment, not saying that you don't have needs that need to be met, but let's take care of those swiftly and upfront so that we can get to the business of taking care of people who have wondered forever, is God really for me or is the church for me?
Yeah, dude, come on. That is so good. So let's close with this. That is so good, man. And we could talk for days, and we just need to carve out more time to do this.
Multi-part series.
Absolutely. I love that, man. So this idea that, that like the idea is gathering essential. Of course it's essential, right? Like we'll be known by our love for each other. Of course it's essential. And we can't wait for it. And I hope people know that and hear that from us, even though, like we've talked about offline, like we're not going to be the first to go regather, but we're not going to be the last. That we're going to try to listen to our people, listen to the, and make wise decisions according to that. So we need to care for each other well. But we also need to be worried about those who are outside of us. And I think that the way we treat each other is the best way we can right now be a witness to those looking in. And
100%.
To be honest, we're not being a very good witness right now. There's so much fighting going on in the church, in the American fabric that's going on right now between evangelicals and those who are saying religious liberties are at stake and all of these things. There's so much infighting that it's a terrible witness. And I think one of the ways that we can guard the hearts of those who are yet to be part of what God is doing is for us to find some sense of harmony and some sense of unity, even if we don't agree on everything.
Totally.
And so I'm really looking forward to finding ways to continue to do that. And I think along those lines is this idea that the measuring stick that we've always used it didn't break, it's disappeared, right?
Yeah, it's like it's vaporized. There's no way of telling how many people are tuning in or for how long, or where was that, a family or was that a single viewer? I mean,
right.
It has dismantled all of the things that gave us, I think, a false confidence in what ministry we were leading in some season.
So how does that change for us pastorally, right? The value systems that we've created or inherited and all of that, how does that play itself out in this new regathering, phase?
I think that you go back to those baseline commandments. If you're a Jesus person, a Jesus believer, the Great Commission and the Great Commandment it's like a grid that you can look at your own life and say, I am doing this. I'm doing this. I could get better here.
Yeah.
And so maybe I put a little bit more effort here, or maybe I invite somebody into my space who's good on this side. And together we've got an equal measure of these things together. I would encourage leaders, if they're listening, let's say your team is listening, I would say, rethink why it is that those metrics have mattered so much to you in seasons past. Is it something that you are using to self-fulfill or puff up, something that you had your hands on? Has God allowed that to be stripped away so that you would come back to his table open-handed and say, I don't know the measurements on this, but I'm willing to say yes. I'm willing to go forward if you're still giving me that pathway of service, that posture of serving somebody else.
Yeah, that's so good, man. So good. Well, Mingo, thank you so much, man, for making the time to get on our Thursday thoughts. And can't wait to keep the conversation going, man, and be partnered in ministry together here in the city, man. So love you, and many, many blessings to you, your family, and to Torrey Pines Church, man. God bless you guys.
Love you guys.